Oh, apparently hedge funds are too complicated for someone like me to understand. That's what my sister's fiancé actually said, out loud, at Sunday dinner. While my entire family nodded along like he'd just explained gravity to a golden retriever, I didn't say anything. I just reached for my water glass and took a slow sip, and my sister laughed that little laugh she does when she's nervous and wants everyone to move on, and my dad chuckled into his roast, and my mom said, "Well, you know our Caitlin, she's always been more of a people person," which is the polished way of saying she doesn't think I'm particularly sharp either. His name was Brendan. My sister Haley had been dating him for 8 months. He worked at a boutique investment firm in downtown Toronto, wore shirts that cost more than my rent, and had the specific kind of confidence that only comes from never having been seriously wrong about anything, not because he's never been wrong, but because the people around him have always been too polite to say so. I'm a forensic accountant. I work for a mid-sized firm in Mississauga. I find fraud. That's my job. I sit in quiet offices and go through numbers until something doesn't add up, and then I keep pulling until I find the thing that someone tried very hard to hide. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make good dinner conversation. It doesn't have a punchy 2-word description the way hedge fund manager does. So at family dinners, I tend to get asked if I'm still doing the spreadsheet thing, and I say yes, and someone changes the subject. I've been doing this for 6 years. I am very, very good at it. Brendan didn't know that. He didn't particularly care to know anything about me beyond the fact that I was Haley's quieter, less impressive older sister. And that Sunday, somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the apple crumble, he decided to explain to me why my career path was, in his words, a little limited. "No offense," he said, which is always the disclaimer people use right before they mean every word of it. "But forensic accounting is kind of a support role, right? You're there to clean up after the real decisions get made." I said. "I just think someone with your analytical skills could probably aim higher. Like there are real opportunities in the market right now. Especially in alternative assets." My dad said, "That's actually a great point." My sister looked at me with that same expression she's had since we were kids. Half apology, half please don't make this weird. I didn't make it weird. I smiled. I said, "You might be right." And I asked my mom if she wanted me to help clear the plates. That was March. The engagement party was in September. Let me tell you about my family, because it matters. My parents, my dad, Doug, and my mom, Linda, are good people. They genuinely love us. But they are also the kind of people who measure things in appearances. My dad spent 30 years in commercial real estate, and he understands the world in terms of what things look like from the outside. The right neighborhood, the right car, the right handshake. My mom is a retired school principal, meticulous, organized, deeply invested in the image of a family that has it together. Haley is 4 years younger than me. She's warm, she's social, she's beautiful in the way that makes rooms pay attention. She works in marketing, and she's good at it. She has always been the one my parents point to first when someone asks how their kids are doing. Not because they love her more. I genuinely don't think that's it. But because Haley's life is easy to summarize. It sounds good in a sentence. Mine requires a paragraph that most people stop listening to halfway through. I am the older one, the responsible one, the one who shows up early and stays late and doesn't ask for much and doesn't cause drama and is quietly, invisibly, reliably there. I am the kind of person families take for granted, not out of malice, but out of habit. You don't notice the floor until it gives way under you. So when Brendan started making the jokes, and they were jokes, always jokes, always jokes, always jokes delivered with that easy smile of his, nobody pushed back. Not even Haley, who loves me because he wasn't being cruel exactly, just slightly dismissive in that way that's hard to name. And I let it go, because I always let it go. Because making it a thing felt like more trouble than it was worth. What I didn't know then was that it was already worth quite a lot. 5 months before the engagement party in the early spring, I got assigned to a new file at work. I can't share details of active cases, obviously, but I can tell you the general shape of it. A mid-sized private equity firm in the GTA, a complaint filed with the Ontario Securities Commission, allegations that certain investment products being sold to retail investors were not what they were described to be in the offering documents. My job was to go in and follow the money. I would pretend I made the connection immediately. I didn't. I was 3 weeks into the file before I noticed, almost by accident, that one of the associated numbered companies listed in the corporate registry had an address I recognized, not from work, from Haley's Instagram stories, a glass-walled office building in the financial district where she'd once posted a photo of Brendan's view captioned, "Not bad for a Thursday." I sat with that for a long time before I did anything. The thing about forensic accounting is that you learn very quickly to separate what you feel from what you can prove. Feelings are noise. Numbers are signal. So I set aside the fact that this was my sister's fiancé and I did what I always do. I followed the documents. The firm Brendan worked for wasn't the primary target of the OSC complaint, but it was connected. One of the products that had been missold to investors had been structured, in part, through a vehicle that Brendan's firm had advised on. The offering memorandum had overstated projected returns. The risk disclosures had buried significant conflicts of interest in language so technical it was practically designed not to be understood. Real people had lost real money. Retirees in Brampton and Burlington who thought they were buying into a stable income fund and instead ended up holding something much more volatile. I couldn't tell whether Brendan himself knew. That wasn't my determination to make. The investigators would get there. What I could see very clearly in the documents was that the firm had known and that Brendan was a senior associate on the file. His name was in the correspondence. I finished my section of the report in late August. I sent it to my supervising partner. I didn't say anything to my family. I didn't say anything to Haley. What would I have said? I don't have proof of what you know personally. I just have a paper trail that ends very close to where you're standing. I went to the engagement party. My mom had spent 3 months planning it. She rented a private room at a restaurant on King Street, the kind of place with exposed brick and a prix-fixe menu and a sommelier who uses the word notes 11 times before you've had your first sip. 60 guests, mostly family and their friends, a few couples Haley and Brenda knew from their social circle. My aunt flew in from Vancouver. My dad wore the blazer he saves for occasions he considers important. I wore a dark green dress. I got there early and helped my mom arrange the place cards, and she grabbed my arm and said, "Just be nice tonight, okay? This matters to Haley." And I said, "I know, Mom. I'm always nice." She looked at me for a second like she wasn't sure if that was true, and then someone arrived and she went to greet them. The dinner was fine. I sat near the end of the table beside my aunt, and we talked about her garden and the drive from the airport and how the price of groceries in this country has become genuinely unhinged. Brendan made the rounds, charming and easy, the version of himself that he performs in public. Haley looked happy. She really did. And I felt something complicated about that, sitting in my chest, something I didn't have a clean name for. The toast started after dessert. My dad went first. He talked about how proud he was of Haley, how Brendan was exactly the kind of man he'd hoped she'd find, how this was a family gaining a son. He teared up a little. He's not an emotional man, my dad, so when he does, it lands. Half the table was already reaching for napkins. Then Brendan stood up. He was good at this. Of course he was. He talked about how Haley had changed him, how she was the most brilliant person he'd ever met, and everyone laughed in the right places and cooed in the right places, and he had the room completely. Then, near the end, he looked down the table at me with this particular smile. "I also want to say something about Caitlin," he said. The table turned. "Haley talks about you all the time, and I know we've had our differences." A small laugh from the crowd. "But honestly, having you in this family is something I'm really grateful for. You're solid, like someone's got to be the responsible one." Another laugh. "We love you for it. It was perfectly calibrated, warm enough that no one could object to it, dismissive enough that I heard exactly what he meant. Solid, responsible, the background." He had just toasted to my adequacy in front of 60 people and received applause for it. I looked at Haley. She was clapping, smiling at me, and I could tell she thought it was sweet. I picked up my champagne glass. I took a sip. And then I stood up. I hadn't planned this. I want to be clear about that. I had come here intending to sit quietly and eat my food and go home, but something in me had been accumulating for a long time, and Brendan's little toast had been the last thing added to a very full container, and I just stood up. "I'd love to say something too, if that's okay." The table quieted. My mom's expression shifted to careful and watchful. My dad looked surprised. Haley looked uncertain. Brendan looked pleasant and unworried, because why would he be worried about me? "Brendan," I said, "you're right that I'm thorough. That's actually a job requirement." I paused. "I'm a forensic accountant, and I've spent the last 5 months on a file involving a private equity firm in Toronto." I looked at him. "And the offering memorandum for the Northgate Income Series Fund, which your firm advised on. I've read it very carefully." The pleasantness left his face. "I want to be clear that I'm not making any legal claims tonight," I said, still calm, still measured. "I just want Haley and my family to know that there are questions being asked by the OSC about that fund and about the people who worked on it." The room was very quiet. "I love my sister," I said, looking at Haley, "and I think she deserves to know what I know, so she can decide for herself what questions to ask." I set down my champagne glass. "That's all. Congratulations to you both." I sat down. It was not a movie moment. There was no applause. There was no dramatic music. There was just 60 people trying to understand what had happened, and Brendan sitting very still across the table, and my sister looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between shock and recognition. Like a door she hadn't noticed had just swung open. My dad said, carefully, "Caitlin, I know." I said, "I'm sorry for the timing. I really am." The dinner ended early. People found reasons to leave. My mom cried in the bathroom. My aunt patted my hand and said very quietly, "Good girl." And that actually broke me a little, the simplicity of it. Brendan left without speaking to me. Haley didn't speak to me either. Not that night. What happened afterward was not neat or satisfying in the way that stories want it to be. The OSC investigation continued. I was not involved in any of the subsequent proceedings. My report had been one piece of a much larger file, and once I'd handed it over, it was out of my hands. I went back to work the following Monday. I ate my lunch at my desk. I answered my emails. I had other files, but the pieces moved. That much I know. By November, there were reports in the Financial Post about a regulatory review of several connected firms in the GTA. Brendan's firm was named. Brendan was placed on administrative leave while the matter was reviewed internally. I found out later, through channels I'd rather not detail, that he had cooperated with investigators and provided documentation about the decisions made above him. Whether that speaks well of him or not, I genuinely don't know. The engagement was called off in October. Haley called me on a Wednesday evening, just over 3 weeks after the party. I was doing dishes when my phone lit up with her name. I almost didn't answer. I picked up on the 4th ring. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started. Her voice was very level, "about how you've been sitting on that information for months." "Yeah. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I turned off the tap. "Because I didn't have anything to tell you. I had a file, I had documents, I had his name near some documents. That's not the same as knowing what he knew or when he knew it. I can't tell my sister that her fiancé might be involved in securities fraud based on a corporate registry entry. That's not fair to anyone." She was quiet for a moment. "But you knew before the party." "Yes. You could have told me privately." "I know. I should have. I'm sorry. And I meant it. I really did. The party had been the wrong venue. I'd let too much build up, and it had come out sideways, and I'd made something hard even harder. I know that. I handled it badly." Another silence. "Then, the stuff you said about the fund, about the investors, were they real people?" "Yes. Like regular people? Not just other firms. Retirees mostly. People who thought they were buying into something safe." She exhaled slowly. "Okay." A pause. "I need some time. I know I'm not." She stopped, started again. "I loved him. Or I thought I did. I don't know what I thought. I don't know what was real. I didn't tell her it would be fine. I didn't know if it would be fine. I didn't know if it would be. I said, "You're going to be okay, Hales," because I do know that. I've known that about her since she was 7 years old. We didn't talk again for about 6 weeks. And then, one Saturday in December, she showed up at my apartment with 2 coffees from the place on my corner that I've gone to every morning for 4 years, which meant she'd asked around to find out which one it was, which meant she'd been thinking about me. She handed me the cup. She stood in my doorway. She said, "Can I come in?" I stepped back to let her through. We didn't have some big emotional reckoning. That's not how we are. We sat in my living room and we drank our coffees, and I asked her how the job was going, and she asked about my current file, and neither of us mentioned Brendan's name. And at some point she said, very quietly, "I feel like I didn't really know what you did for work." "Most people don't," I said. "I knew you were an accountant." "Forensic accountant. It's different." "Yeah." She looked at her cup. "What does that actually mean?" "Forensic? It means I follow the money until I find out who lied." She thought about that for a second. Then she said, "That's actually kind of cool." And I laughed. Actually laughed, the first real one in a while. Don't tell Mom. She still thinks I do tax returns. My mom took longer. She called me twice in October, and both calls were tense, careful things. She was hurt about the party. She was worried about Haley. She couldn't understand why I hadn't handled it differently. I let her say all of it. I didn't defend myself point by point. I just said, "I know it was hard. I know the timing was bad. And I need you to know I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to protect someone." She didn't have much to say to that. She said she needed time too. By Christmas, she had come around in her way. She asked me at the kitchen table after dinner when it was just the two of us, "Were you scared to say something?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I was scared to stay quiet." She looked at me for a long time. Then she reached over and patted my hand twice, and that was that. I think about Brendan sometimes, not often, but sometimes. I don't know what kind of person he is at his core. I don't know if he understood what the firm was doing to those investors and participated anyway, or if he was told to sign things and didn't ask the questions he should have, or if he was genuinely in the dark until it was too late. Those distinctions matter legally. They matter morally. I'm not in a position to make that call. What I know is that the numbers don't care about your intentions. The numbers are what they are. Someone lost their retirement savings because a document said one thing and the reality was another. And somewhere along the chain of people who built that document was a name I recognized. That's all I had. That's all I had. That's all I ever have. And in my job, that's enough to start pulling the thread. I got promoted in the spring. Senior associate, moving to manager in the fall, pending review. My supervising partner put a note in my file that said my work on the Q1 investigation had been exemplary. I didn't mention it to my parents for 3 weeks, and when I did, my dad said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart," and then asked if I wanted more pasta. Which is fine, it really is. I don't need the room to turn and stare. I don't need 60 people applauding. I just need the numbers to be right and the truth to be somewhere someone can find it when they need it. That's the job. That's always been the job. The quietest people in any room are usually the ones who've been paying the most attention, not because they have nothing to say, because they've learned to wait until what they say will actually matter. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best, I see you. Drop a comment. I'd love to know your story. And if this one meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll be back with another one soon.